But this topic is near and dear to my heart. I was 19 when I realized not only that I hated myself, but how much I hated myself. I didn't like my skin. I didn't like my hair. I didn't like the thoughts and feelings I had. Everything that I was focused on were my flaws and my failures, and it consumed me. 19 years into life, and that's what I spent most of my time really focusing on. What I'm going to do is interrupt myself and press mute because I get easily distracted. And Saida, would you be able to do that for me if we end up if someone accidentally unmutes themselves again? Yes, so I'll get back to what I was saying. Yes, so yeah, my failures, my flaws, my inadequacies, all those imperfections, the things that make us human, that is what I was focused on. I didn't pay attention to what was going well, what I liked, what was good. I was totally immersed and preoccupied by what I didn't like. And that was where my sense of self was. It wasn't healthy. It was really unbalanced and biased. So after realizing that, I realized it in a church service of all places. Um, it took many years for me to climb out of that hole, and it took counseling. It took many years of education, reading books, and uh, eventually I started helping people, helping people who struggled with the same stuff. And we'll get into more about how I help people as we move through this talk today. But by the end of our time today, we're going to talk about 3 things that we can do to secure a healthy esteem, a healthy sense of self. And the first thing that we get to do is change our culture. Changing our culture is important. I know when we think about culture, we usually think about the clothes that we wear, we think about the foods that we eat, our ethnicity, our religion, our those are the things that we call culture. But culture is not just things that we can taste and that we can see. They're things that we believe. They're how we feel, how we interact with each other, how we treat ourselves, how do we talk to ourselves, because whatever happens in here is going to make its way out here. And that informs our culture, the tones, the attitudes, the disposition of our culture. We have a culture of one. Everyone has a culture of one. The world that you live in, the way that you engage with yourself, you bring that intentionally or unintentionally to your relationships, to your family, to your class, to your job, to your community. It's important that we become aware of our ideas and attitudes about self-esteem. I come from a Christian background, Christian faith, and I don't know if you can relate. You can let me know in the chat if you can relate to this, but a lot of us have these cultural understandings of esteem and the self that I think are not really healthy. We're not encouraged to feel good about ourselves. We're not encouraged to think well of ourselves. People are afraid to feel good of themselves. Let me know if you've ever heard anything like this. People are afraid to feel good about themselves because they're afraid they will be filled with pride. Have you ever heard of anything like that? If yes, put yes in the chat. Heard that. People are afraid to feel prideful, right? There's a difference between feeling proud and being filled with pride. We don't make that distinction in some cultures, so we're afraid to speak well of ourselves and to feel good about ourselves. Okay? I believe that's a myth. Sure, it is possible to become filled with pride and to think that you're better than other people, but that doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen automatically just because you start thinking and acknowledging good things about yourself. What about this one? Some people are afraid to be their best because it will create jealousy and conflict. Some of our relationships, some of our environments, some of our community gatherings, people will experience jealousy and conflict. And some people believe that's because people think that they're too good or they're better than other people. And while that may be true, those aren't signs of a healthy self esteem. Thinking that you're better than someone or worth more than somebody, that has nothing to do with esteem. Okay, that's not a healthy self esteem. That's an overinflated view of oneself. Okay, that's not what we're talking about. Some people are unfamiliar with feeling good about themselves because they've been made to feel badly about themselves all their lives. That is the case for many people. Even when you come from a family that is actually loving and doing their best to be supportive. A lot of parents that I coach, I caution them and I encourage them to not just point out things that they want their children to change, not just voice concerns, but to acknowledge what is good. Acknowledge what is good. Okay, what do you like about your child? Catch them doing good things. Okay, these are things that impact our esteem and our sense of self, our perspective about ourselves. It is definitely informed by our culture, by our environment. These are things that we get to change. And if we don't, it's catastrophic. I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean by that. But one of the other points that I have here about some of the cultural understandings that I think are important for us to change is feeling good about oneself makes them selfish. They're so focused on themselves, and that will ruin the sense of community. That will diminish community, and people will value the individual over the group. While that is possible, and some people believe that's, the Western way. It's all about the individual. It's my needs, and forget the family, forget the community. It's me. I got to take care of me. While that is a thing, that has nothing to do with a healthy sense of self. Okay. I want to do this little exercise with you. I want you to think about someone in the community. Let's actually create this person, someone in the community, and you can open your chat. Let's decide together. Do we want this person to be a male or a female? Talk back to me. We're going to create this person in our community. All right. Well, we got male and female. Well, the first one that came up was female. So we're going to go with female. Okay. Do we want her to be young or old? 30s. Okay. 30s. She's in her 30s. Now, does she contribute to the community? Is she involved in community? Yes or no? Very active in the community. Okay, so she's very active in the community. And let's see, what else can we say about her? Does she allow people to disrespect her or hurt the people that she loves? Does she just stand by and watch? Yes or no? Nope, nope. She definitely does not. She is outspoken. She will speak up for justice, right? She's expressive. She's assertive. Okay? As I'm describing this person, would you say that she has a healthy sense of self? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. Yes. 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 I'm getting a whole lot of yeses. From this picture that we just created, right? We're seeing this person who is engaging with others, has values and cares about other people. She is assertive. These are signs of somebody who has a healthy sense of esteem. It's really, really important that we see healthy esteem as something to aspire to, something that anyone at any age can experience. Because when the fiber of our culture reflects this kind of tapestry, this richness, it doesn't take away from the community, it adds to the community. That's important. So it's important that we change the culture. Okay. When we change the culture, then we can actually connect the dots. There is a strong link between healthy esteem and mental health and wellness. When I think about esteem, or actually, let's come talk about mental health. I've talked about mental health before. Let's look at this definition really quickly because I know there's a spectrum. There are experiences that would be considered mental illness versus, a mental health crisis and challenge. And there's a whole spectrum. But ultimately, when our mental health is impaired or impacted, it affects our ability to access and use our emotional and psychological capacity. Okay? Everyone has their own unique strengths and their own ability or capacity of degree of mental health and wellness. And we get to know that about ourselves. We get to know who we are so we can care for ourselves. We want to understand our nature so we can nurture our nature. This is really important. So we don't have the same expectations of ourselves as we have of other people, but also we can pay attention to notice, okay, you know what? I'm not feeling as well as I could. I'm not thinking as clearly as I could. What factors are impacting? So when we start to know ourselves and pay attention and start to care for ourselves, then our degree of wellness and mental health, we can maintain it, we can improve it. It's something that if it gets impaired, if it decreases, we can do whatever it takes to build ourselves back up, whether that means eating differently, resting, exercising, getting support, in some cases, taking medication, whatever it is, we get to do that. Okay. So when I think about mental health, one of the most common things that is important for us to connect the dots with, at the core of many crises and many challenges that develop into really significant experiences of mental health and mental illness, is anxiety. Anxiety is often at the core of challenges for many people, many people. And again, you know me, I like spectrums. There's a whole spectrum of anxiety from feeling a little nervous to feeling paralyzed with fear to having, paranoia filled, panic induced, crises, okay? Panic attacks. There's a whole range of events. But quite often, we don't think about anxiety in its simplest terms, which is a picture of the future that's negative. When you picture a negative future called the horror movie of your life, you're going to feel anxiety in your body. I know this all too well, and it can happen anytime to anyone. You have the ability to imagine something horrible happening. Your body's going to pick up on the signs and what you see, and you're going to feel it in your body. Especially when it comes to children, they have a very difficult time of discerning what's real from what's imagined. They have vivid imaginations, and a lot of parents don't understand. They're overreacting to the situation, but they're not overreacting to what they're picturing in their minds. And that happens for us as adults too. And I want to connect the dots between anxiety and esteem because when you imagine yourself failing, unable to produce and live an effective life, after long of seeing this picture over and over and over, it is a strong likelihood that you're going to roll over into depression. When you start to think to yourself, nothing ever works, this is never work, I'm never going to this, I'm never going to that. We have these ideas about ourselves that we buy into, that we believe. We picture these things and they feel real to us. Every person that I've worked with who struggled with anxiety had a very poor sense of self, very poor sense of self. So if you don't think much of yourself, it's important for you to be aware that anxiety might be playing a significant role in that. Yes, there's the culture, but yes, there's also anxiety, which can be as a result of the trauma from the cultural experiences, but also the way that you think. Now, everybody experiences anxiety. I'm one of four children, and I imagine for most of my experience, especially earlier in life, my anxiety is probably a little bit more intense than my brother's. He's older than me by a couple of years. And it was just the way that I thought. I didn't understand my thoughts, really didn't understand them. I didn't know to pay attention to them. I didn't know I could change them. So I was focused a whole lot on what wasn't going well. And my esteem was really, really poor. So when I talk about self esteem, I'm really talking about what somebody sees when they look in the mirror, and even when the mirror is gone. What do they see? What do they think about themselves? After they've had an interaction with someone, what do they reflect on? Do they reflect on what went poorly or what went well? How they made mistakes? And while they can focus on where they can grow, they don't really think about an opportunity as much as a necessity. Not I can change, I can grow, because that speaks to capacity, but I have to change. I gotta fix this. Because if I don't fix this, then I'm not going to be worth anything. I'll never amount to anything. My life is going to be horrible. I need to. There's this desperation fueled by anxiety. And when you carry this around everywhere you go, it informs all of your relationships, it informs all of your activities, even the people who are brilliant. I'm an intelligent guy. I was always an intelligent guy. I didn't always do well in school because I was stressed out and I might have skipped over some lessons, didn't understand things. Didn't mean I didn't have the capacity to understand things, but I didn't understand myself. I didn't know that I was intelligent enough to understand, and I might have required help to understand. My thoughts were if I needed help, then that means I'm not smart to begin with. That's all or nothing thinking. Smart people don't need help. That's just the way I thought. Nobody taught me how to think that way. I was wired that way. That was part of my nature. And as a result of that, I thought poorly of myself. So when we see people living certain lives, sure, there are many contributing factors, but the most influential factor is the way that we speak to ourselves, what we think about ourselves. The most powerful voice in the world is the one in your own head. It doesn't matter what people say to you, it doesn't matter what people say about you, whether it's good or it's bad. If you don't believe it, it's not going to make a difference. If people tell you you're worthwhile, and you're smart, and you're this and you're that, and you never actually believe it, you never recognize it as true, you never internalize it as true, you'll always live as if you're not. It's important that we connect the dots, especially loving, caring parents. You see your children have capacity and you're confused. Why are they not living up to it? Because they don't believe it. They don't believe it. It's important that we connect these dots. It impacts our mental health. So, when I think about healthy self esteem, you notice I talk a lot about the thoughts and what that looks like, what we see through our own eyes. So, when I started talking about self esteem and learning about it in school, we would use phrases like high self esteem, low self esteem, poor self esteem. And I don't use those terms anymore. I refer to esteem as healthy. It's healthy. And when I say it's healthy, I mean the principles on which your perspective about yourself are based will determine if it's healthy or not. Much of our society bases our sense of self and self-worth, because esteem actually means, your self-esteem is your self-value, your self-worth, which boils down to a self-concept, a cognitive construct, like what you picture, what you understand. It's information. Okay? Now, if all you focus on is negative, if there's a scale, as you can see, it's going to be weighted heavily on the negative side. That doesn't mean that there isn't something on the opposing side here. It just means it's unbalanced. It's not accurate. If every time you think of yourself, you think of the negative thing, then that's what's going to be heavily weighted in your mind. It doesn't mean the other things don't exist. We're just not paying attention to it. And the reason why that's not healthy is because it's not accurate. It is not accurate. We walk around with an inaccurate picture of ourselves. We can't live authentically if we don't live fully with an awareness of who we are, the good, the great, the wonderful, and the parts that I could stand to mature and grow in this area. People who have a hard time receiving constructive criticism and feedback, sometimes it's not because of how it's offered. Majority of the times it is, but sometimes it's not because of how it's offered. It's because it's offered at all. And we are so fragile and we have such a difficult time because all we see about ourselves is negative. So our perception is already heavily weighted and we become so sensitive to these things. We take them personally. It's an attack on who we are because we're so conditioned to see the negative. We want to change that. We get to change that. Okay. Our society doesn't support this in general either, because we see somebody as valuable based on their roles, okay, their competencies, what they're good at, their performance, achievements, all these tangible external things, right? Sometimes it boils down to how much money you have in the bank. In some communities, some cultures, even in gender, some how much sex you have, how much strength you have, how much power you have, and how you can. When we base our sense of worth on these kinds of things, it's not it's not healthy. What happens is when we base our esteem on our roles and those roles change, what do we have left? Our entire selves are defined by these roles and these things. And when these things change or they go, you lose your job. Even a mom who invested her entire life in her children. When her children grow up and they don't need to be mothered the way they did before, all of a sudden she has no life, no real sense of self-worth because it left with her child, it left with the role. Instead, it's important to look at the content of your character. Who are you? Your natural traits. What makes you valuable is who you are, not what you do. There are many people who have on paper and who look wonderfully successful, but that doesn't stop them from being abusive or unkind or dishonest. We get to think about what matters most, even when we do good things. What moves us to do those good things? What moves us to do those good things skillfully? Well, you might actually be talented, coordinated. You might actually be helpful and passionate, intense, intelligent, logical, right? That same mom who loses her sense of self, if she were to think back about what it took to be the wonderful mother that she has always been, creativity, attentiveness, being intentional, reliable, determined, focused, resourceful, selfless, organized. There are all these wonderful traits that are a part of who she is. If she were to focus on who she was, then she would realize, well, that's a part of me. So even if I'm not in this role anymore, I can exercise these traits of myself in this role or in this role. And suddenly all these options open up to her when she's aware of who she is. The reason why it's not as simple as just telling somebody that they're kind and they're good and all these wonderful, because I think that is important. We do want to weave that into our culture. But it's something that happens when we start to internalize these ideas. Because a healthy sense of esteem is not just an accurate cognitive construct, it's actually experiential. There's what I think about myself, and then there's what I feel within myself. What it feels like to be me can be very different than what it looks like to be me. I've worked with really successful people who experience what we call imposter syndrome, where despite the fact that they've done these wonderful things, they did it. They've won the awards for years. Okay, I'm talking about people who are retiring now, and now they don't have the distraction of work. They don't have the opportunity to hide behind, the things that they're doing to try every day to make sure people don't see what they see. So people don't see what they feel, what they really think about themselves, how small and insignificant they feel. And a lot of the times it's because of childhood painful experiences that were never healed and never fully addressed. There's what you think about yourself, and then there's what you feel about yourself. You can be 220 pounds and 6'5". That's probably a really slim guy, but the point is, you could be really tall and feel really small. What you feel is more important and more powerful than the facts. It's important that we learn to integrate the truth about those facts so we can feel them, we can believe them, we internalize them. So when I work with people, when they're dealing with anxiety, we address the thoughts, and then we move eventually over to the reality about what they know about themselves. And we build that awareness of who they are. And we go through a process where they internalize those truths about themselves. And they live from that place, a place of value and a place of a recognition of capacity. This is a healthy self esteem, an accurate cognitive and experiential awareness of your capacity and your value. You have something to offer, whether you have a job or not, whether you're making as much money as you want to or not, whether you have achieved all your educational goals or not, relationship goals or not. Before you arrive at your destination, it's important that you realize you are worthy of being there. It's not the destination that's going to give you worth and value. You bring worth and value to the destination, to the job, to the relationship. That's why a lot of relationships don't work. They're wanting this relationship to make themselves feel important and valuable. Men and women struggle with their singleness because they think, well, if I was worthy enough to be in a relationship, somebody would have picked me already. Back like me thinking like if I was smart enough, then I would have passed the test without help. Not realizing there are all these other factors contributing to me failing the test. Fact, I failed the test. But other facts was, well, my parents were going through a divorce. I was stressed out. I was helping raise my sisters. I was dealing with anxiety and depression. And my brain doesn't compute numbers, doesn't do the algorithm calculations. It doesn't do any of that stuff when I'm tired and when I'm stressed. That's my nature. Let me get some rest and I'll be able to do it. But because of the way that I thought, I was not aware of how I was thinking, which led me to feel extra anxious and confused about myself and my future. And I concluded that I would never, all or nothing thinking, be anyone or anything of worth when I already was, when I always was. We get to change this in our culture. Let's change the culture so we acknowledge people's worth right where they are, regardless of what's happening in their lives. That doesn't change the value of who they are. We get to connect the dots between mental health and wellness and anxiety and esteem. We talk about wanting to change stigma. Well, we can actually do that with our everyday interactions with ourselves and with others. And how do we keep these trends going? We create the roadmap. Okay? We get good information, informed and experienced sources. Okay? A lot of our family systems and our cultures and our practices, we keep things to ourselves and we block everything out. It's important for us to be open. You can be selective and discerning, but still be open to getting good information. That's important. That's important. And when you do get good information, it's important to have a structure and a process, a supportive process, a process that will support you to move through a journey. Okay? Hearing me talk is wonderful. But reading a book, going through a course, taking a program that invites you to look at these things over and over, to read it, to flip it, to listen to it, to turn it around, to take it apart, to put it back together. That's part of this deepening and internalizing process. It doesn't happen overnight. Even the changes that do happen overnight, they don't necessarily last. It takes a commitment, and a process will help you. There are a number of courses that I have. You can go on my site. They're great resources. Conquering the Big Five is one that really talks about the anxiety-inducing patterns. Sure, it costs $90. $90, that's less than a counseling session, a lot less. And you have this for the rest of your life to look at, to share with your family, to share with your kids, right? To share with your friends. we want to understand these things. Big five thought patterns. I mentioned one of them earlier a couple times, my all or nothing thinking. It shaped the way that I interacted with myself and others. It's important that we understand, get good information, get a supportive process to move through, and then a supportive environment. We are created as relational beings. We're not designed to do life alone. We're not. And we hide our challenges, and we have this expectation of ourselves to be done and perfect and finished and imperviable, impervious and impermeable, like nothing should touch me. I should be a finished product. Nobody is. Nobody's ever done. So you want to have people who embrace that idea around you, that can really be the kind of friend, the kind of family, the kind of coach, the kind of community that will not judge you and will not force you, like hold you accountable. You have to do this, because that doesn't work. But someone who will know you, who will see you, who will speak to the greatness in you and encourage you to see it in yourself, to say it to yourself. That's what community is. That's what we get to be with each other. So move away from the idea that you have to do it by yourself and you have to show up fixed. Your journey, your process of healing and learning and growing, that will inspire someone else. I was talking to a couple, and this is relevant too as well, whether we're coaching or helping people, parenting, right? Teaching. Everything that we do is going to have an impact. We can try to control people and force people to comply, or we can influence people, inspire them to collaborate, to cooperate. Forcing people, controlling people, that leads to resentment, bitterness, and hatred, and all that stuff. Whereas inspiring people, it's based on respect and love and all that good stuff. When you model transparency and you experience healing and you experience growth, the children will see it. Their friends will see it. Your friends will see it. That's how we change. So remember, there is a strong connection between our mental health and wellness and the way that we see ourselves. If we only see the bad and it's filled with anxious pictures about the future and reflections on the past, that's what we'll feel, and we won't have an accurate self-concept. But when we start to pay attention to what's good, what's wonderful, whether we have good performance days or bad performance days, we'll recognize our value. We'll live from that place. We'll take journeys, we'll accomplish goals, not because we have to, but because we want to. And we bring value to those things, to those relationships. We bring value. You don't show up empty-handed. You show up knowing that you've got something valuable to give. So we change the culture, we connect the dots, and then we create the roadmap. We do all these things over and over and over again, and we will improve our mental health and wellness and see that our esteem is not just what you think about yourself, but how you feel. And now, let's have some questions. One of the questions that I often...
Yes. Oh,
go ahead, Pastor Francis. I'll come back to my question
yes.
in a moment.
Yes, thank you so much, Doc. I really appreciate this very topic and the way you handled it. It's very, very good. Now, my question is, because you mentioned that you're coming from a Christian background, which is very good. Now, when Bible said that money answered everything, and it said that money is defense too. So from the concept of what you're saying, and then he said money answers everything. So what's your own perception here based on what you're saying and the interpretation all, in the generation we are now, especially?
So money answers all things. I think what the scripture is highlighting that money can address pretty much everything. You can use money to address things, but money doesn't solve problems. Money doesn't change people. Money doesn't ultimately make people believe they are truly, or it doesn't help them recognize who they really are. There are other ideas that are conveyed about money in the scripture, like the love of money is the root of all evil. Why is that? Well, love is not just liking having it. Love is this reliance, it's this dependence upon it. Anything we depend on, we see as our source of life, we worship it, we idolize it, we live for it. If you're only worthwhile if you have money, what happens when the money's gone? So is your life. So money isn't the solution, it isn't the cure. There's great value to it. There's great value to it, but worshiping it, seeing yourself and it as one, not healthy. One of the questions that I actually get is how do I change this? Like, I know this about myself now. What do I do? Can you help me with that? Yes. This is what I do every single day. Every single day, I help people to know themselves better. And when you know you and you actually see your value, you will appreciate you. You walk differently, you talk differently. You don't wait for people to affirm you. It's nice when people affirm you, but you don't need it. An affirmation from someone else is a confirmation of what you already know to be true, right? That's a healthier place to live from. So if I can be of service in any way, you guys know how to reach me. info@coachdrew.ca. Send me an email and I would gladly help you out. Any other questions? We've got 11 minutes to go. I know some people are a little hesitant sometimes to speak out loud, but you're welcome to throw it in the chat if you have a question. Sometimes people wonder, how do you know that you're having an impact on someone's esteem? And there are telltale signs for me, and moments that I really cherish, even with my children. And I come from a culture where children basically are to be seen and not heard. And that can be actually quite damaging. I can appreciate, children understanding that there are some conversations that are, adult and private. And we get to be intentional as adults to have those in private. But the idea that children don't have a place and they shouldn't be heard, that has caused so much harm because children don't feel safe to share, to engage in conversations, to talk about how they feel, to say yes to something or to say no to things. And they're easily convinced that when they're being taken advantage of, they shouldn't talk about it. I encourage my children to talk. Talk. If you're not happy with something, talk about it. If they call you a tattletale, that's wonderful because I want to know. I want you to tattle. Tell me all the tales, and I will tell you if that's something worthy of being concerned about or not. I'll share my opinion. Um, and I saw this taking effect in a situation where we went to a family friend's home, and there was this adult, this lady, and it was the first time we met her, and she was wonderfully expressive and playful and all this stuff. And she had an interaction with my daughter, who was, I think she was probably 8 or 9 at the time, and she was actually treating my daughter unfairly, right? She was bullying her playfully. Um, but my daughter was just like, no, that's not fair. No, I'm, and I was just like, yay, yay, she's asserting herself. She's saying no, even to an adult. That's countercultural for some people, but we are changing culture, and it's important that we do. She wasn't being disrespectful. She was just being clear about what she thought was fair. And she does the same thing with me. Sometimes it's sometimes it's just not fun. But I don't want her to not get practice doing that. People who have a healthy sense of self are a lot more assertive. A lot more assertive. I talk about this in one of my courses, Living Life the Assertive Way, the difference between assertiveness, being passive, and being aggressive, and even passive aggressive. People who have a healthy sense of self, who don't struggle heavily with esteem and depression, are more likely to communicate assertively, understanding the thoughts and what causes you to pull back and be nervous and hesitant or overly aggressive. It's important to understand those things. So we get to shape that, and influence our children. We get to model that. I wasn't always assertive. Some situations it's harder to be assertive than others. When you believe that people have more power than you, right? When you think you're vulnerable in a certain situation, yeah, it can be challenging, but it's important. It's important to do that. I have a question here. How do you not allow others' perspectives about you to change who you are? Okay, very good question. So remember what I said about the most influential voice and powerful voice in the world is the one in your head. So sometimes it's about the ratio. Sometimes if someone says something negative about us, we go away and we repeat it over and over and over and over and over and over and over. We say one good thing about ourselves, and then we say the negative thing 10 million times. 10 years down the road, people are still rehearsing what somebody said, what somebody said. Well, you're internalizing that. Each repetition moves it deeper. So we want to be intentional about the ratio, but then we also want to be intentional about the value. Okay? We sometimes value people's opinions, and we don't realize that we are we are depositing or investing and building the stock in their opinion. We do that without intention a lot of the times. And we devalue our own opinion while we're doing that. It's important to assess what gives this person's voice value. Now, somebody's giving you an assessment and they have all the experience and they have all this stuff. It might make sense to appreciate what they're trying to say, to look at it, analyze it critically, take the good. And sometimes the packaging isn't great. Sometimes how they said it isn't the same as what they said, right? They could have said it a different way. How they said it probably didn't sit well with you, but is there value to what they said? If the person does not live a reputable, esteem worthy life, when I say esteem, I don't mean worth of their value as a person. I'm saying, let me give you an example. If somebody is, if somebody's abusive to their family members, and they're going to come around and then tell you the formula in order to be kind and have a happy home. And they're going to criticize you. Are you going to value their opinion? If they speak down to you, they speak poorly about you, you get to pay attention to those things, right? People don't treat other people based on who those other people are. They treat people based on who they know themselves to be. So if I'm mean to you, I'm not mean to you because you deserve it. I'm mean to you because I practice being mean. That's what I do, right? So it's important to not personalize how people treat you. You can take it personally because it's happening, but it doesn't necessarily happen to you because of who you are, right? It's important to differentiate that. So, how do you not allow other people's opinions of you to shape you? Well, again, think about that ratio. Are you going to notice the negative thing over and over and over, or are you going to pay attention to all the positive things? And then, really, are you intentional about the value of that person's opinion? And are you discerning about, the reputation of this person based on what you've known, right? Those are important things. Um, Another question here, great question. And this will be the last one for today. Um, how do you encourage kids to speak up for themselves, especially when they are quiet, when they're the, quiet type of kid? It starts with listening. It starts with listening to them well and regularly, not just in moments where it's an opportune time for them to be assertive, but in those everyday moments where you pay attention and you hear their voice, you see, you listen with your eyes, you pay attention to what they value, and you inquire, you get to know them. When you know somebody, you can effectively love them. You can effectively love, especially with children. They don't have this awareness. They haven't lived with so many years to be able to reflect on all the good that they bring. They don't have that. That's the opportunity for us as parents to say, I know you, I've watched you. This is what I love about you. I don't just love you. I like you. I like these things about you. I admire these things. It's those conversations where we listen, where we see, where we say, and we love, and we fill them with love. That helps them to have a sense of worth and know that their voice is important. And then we give them practice, we give them opportunities to share. Even after the fact, we can revisit things and say, you know what was that like for you? Because a lot of times, I as a kid I was not assertive. I was not assertive. I was passive, and then I'd go home to be angry. I wish I had done this. I wish I had done that. And I never really appreciated that I could do things different. If I had somebody to dialogue with me, well, what would you have done? What would you have preferred? Okay. Because what we rehearse, we perform. Right. So it's important for them to be able to start to see themselves speaking up for themselves, to witness themselves in their minds, and then they practice it and then they do it. As shy as your child might be, they have a voice, they have something to say. So listening well, and then learning how to see them and speak to them in a way that invites them to start sharing and to continue sharing. That's the route that I would go. You're so welcome. You're so welcome. And Saeed, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Blackwood, for joining us today. I know it's always a pleasure to have you. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, please drop your email down below so we can share our next workshop with you. And have an amazing night.
Bye,
Bye
everybody.
bye.
I know I see
Thank you.
another.
Good night.
You're so welcome. I see another question. It's a good question. I'll probably just go on Instagram and do a live about it another time. But I will definitely copy you or tag you on it so you can share it. All right. Bye, everybody.